then kind of more what we're doing, that ontologies and general semantics space. So I'm hoping I don't really have to go into a lot of detail on pre-competitive collaboration and what the advantage of it is. Pistoia Alliance is a US not-for-profit that has been set up to facilitate pre-competitive collaboration in pharma and healthcare and life sciences strictly. And really, for us, what that primarily means is working in the areas of data management, best practices for things, interacting with regulatory authorities, and we have public-private partnerships with the FDA, for example, and we have the EMA, MHRA involved in several of our projects, and WHO. And then also working on sustainability, which is developing people as well as things like carbon footprint for clinical trials. So we do a lot of this, but we do tend to find out a lot of it boils down to the data side. So within the Alliance, we have 4 strategic priorities. We do stuff outside of this because we're member-led, but these are the areas that we really focus on. And what I tend to see is that really most of this is data-driven. It boils down to data and the rest are applications. And part of that is that all pharma companies, all healthcare organizations, academics, not-for-profits, patient organizations have very similar problems. And where we can hit at that pre-competitive area is really how to organize, manage, maintain, and consume data. The actual application will tend to be more on the competitive side, but the fundamental stuff, like ontologies, really isn't competitive. And in fact, it's the opposite. There's a big advantage to aligning with other people. And so that's really what we try to facilitate. And so we've got these strategic priorities, and within that, we have built a portfolio, thus Chief Portfolio Officer, of projects and activities. So some of these are communities of practice, communities of experts, which are designed to spin off things like white papers and best practices, but some are projects designed to spin off assets, real kind of data products, you could call them, although we tend to be management rather than the actual data. So as you see, we have 4 currently ongoing ontology projects. I'll go into a little more detail on IDMPO and Pharma General later, but these IDMPO has been going for about 4 years now. FlinOps, Pharma, and Pharma General Ontology and CMC have been going just for 1 year and are just going into their 2nd year. In the case of ClinOps, if we can find funders for it, the others we have. But we try to be fit for purpose. And although ontologies are a big thing now, it's not always necessary to go all the way to an ontology. And so we also have projects around bioassay annotation. Data Fairy has been running for a long time, a general community for fair data. And one of the public partnerships we have is this in vitro pharmacology project, which involves how do we share data with regulatory agencies using the Data Fairy work, which is itself built on BAO. And you will see a lot of these other projects touch upon this as well. So we're just kicking off a project around in vitro NAMs. NAMs are novel alternative methods, so things like organs on a chip and things like that. Data standards for those, because they're a big developing area, and their data isn't defined. But at the moment, we don't think necessarily it's going to need a whole ontology. We only use it where it's fit for purpose. And as well as these ongoing projects, we have another portfolio full of ideas that are currently being developed. And I've highlighted here 3 of them are actually ontology efforts. One is instrument and equipment, and that will by necessity be part of our CMC ontology, but also the demand came from a different side around maintaining cybersecurity and keeping updates up to date for lab instruments, whether that's synthetic or analytical or anything like that. And so aligning all of that was really important. The BAO team in Miami, we've been speaking to because our pharma members came back and said there are certain issues around how they deal with experiments and certain other things. And so we're looking to see, well, can we work as a conduit between Pharma, who have some money, and the group in Miami to ensure that this is maintained and continue to be developed. And lastly, the real world data ontology, which is really around describing data. A lot of these do boil back, and you'll see a lot of the other stuff in here is it's early stage, it's dealing with chemistry, chemical exchange, chemical format, standard exchange of data. So the Pistoia Alliance actually started off very much in these earlier stages in basic research. We were formed by a group of computational chemists and cheminformaticians meeting in Pistoia, Italy, and saying, well, you know, we've all been together. And we still do work in that area. As I mentioned, we have data fairy going on. We have the bioassay ontology enhancements going on. But we're also looking to extend further down the line. And so we're working with the FDA, WHO, EMA, US Pharmacopoeia on the GSRS consortium, which is the Global Substance Registration System. They want to spin it out of the NIH, where it's currently developed, and make it a public open source system under the Pistoia umbrella. In vitro pharmacology, I mentioned, is around data exchange. Both of those build on historical projects. The in vitro pharmacology on data fairy, GSRS on our IDMP ontology. So this identification of medicinal products ontology. And as I mentioned, there are these other ontologies that we're starting to work on as ideas. In the case of the equipment one and the CMC, we're going into year 2 and hope to actually have a version 1.0 release at the end of this year. A lot of those carry all the way through the pipeline. We do less work, but are doing a bit more on purely the clinical, the regulatory, and the real world data aspects. But within the Alliance, because we are funded primarily by pharma, we have software vendors, we have instrument vendors, we have the sell side as well, we have not-for-profits, we have academics, and we have patient organizations involved. So we have, for example, the Michael J. Fox Parkinson's organization came along to our last meeting. We do try and make it end to end. And the pharma orgs want it really applied, really end to end. We are doing stuff that can be used in industry and not just doing stuff for the sake of doing it. So there we also have these other overarching efforts to pull things together, a standard way to share ontologies and other data, pharma general ontology projects, and our FAIR and data governance communities. So the goal really of all of these is to build this network of interoperable ontologies, and that's really important. They don't always have to be exactly the same, exactly aligned, integratable, but they have to be interoperable. We keep that in mind. Our IDMP ontology, partly because it's the oldest, but partly because it represents the products that our members work on, is at the center with the pharma general ontology surrounding it and really acting as that Rosetta Stone between all the other assets that we have. So just a little more information, and I'll happily share these. You're not really supposed to read all of these. Hopefully you know about IDMP. It's an ISO standard for the identification of medicinal products. A few years ago, we had a group of companies, and we had 11 large pharma companies working together on this to build a standard way to implement the standard, right? Because there was no data model associated with the standard, and we're now interacting with ISO. We collaborate with ISO in trying to get our IDMP ontology into the standard itself. So the goal is, rather than everybody saying they're using their own implementation of IDMP, which would lose a lot of the benefits of having a standard IDMP, use the same language to communicate it. So define an ontology which allows all of this data to be communicated. And for example, we're using it at the moment to take, in the shortages problem being seen by EMA, to take EMA data, map it into the ontology, to take in-house pharma data, map it into the ontology, which allows a simple graph-to-graph comparison. So by speaking the same language, things become a lot easier. And as I mentioned, this has been going on for several years. We've released version 1.0 in January of this year. We're now on version 1.3, which is available to people on the project at the moment only, but will eventually go to Pistoia Alliance members and then the general public. And then next year, we're going to continue development, but also really work on it as a production release. And so have maintenance, updates, and bug fixes and things like that. Everyone knows this quote. I mean, that's the thing about standards. There are lots and lots of them. And the same is true with ontologies and everything else. And this is where the Pharma general ontology comes in. At the moment, it's not really an ontology. The goal is really to pick which resources are best to use across Pharma. So rather than everybody having their own little favorite one, to identify for this use case, this is probably the best public resource to use. For this use case, this is the best resource to use. The goal of this is not to build ontologies, although if we identify gaps, we will end up doing that, but really to make recommendations to standardize. And as you see, we've got a really good selection of Pharma backing this. And if we can get agreement across a lot of different resources here, the weight of this group will be enough to push it through and make it generally accepted. So in some ways similar to IDMP, but on a much broader scope, the goal is to get everyone speaking the same language, or at least be interoperable. So where you're not using exactly the same thing, know you can have mappings between the two. And that really is a key factor in there. Now, it's an enormous problem. We've just finished the first year of this. We're going into the second year. And so at the moment, we're focusing on just controlled vocabulary. What is the definition of a disease, of a protein, of a product, of a small molecule? Getting those standard definitions there. And then we're gradually going to grow it both horizontally out to Thesauri and then on an ontology, but also we recognize there is overlap in some of these other areas where we're going to have to touch upon as well. So that's kind of future. The focus at the moment is this controlled vocabulary. Our group of experts providing input is bigger than that group of funding members. The funding members make the final decision, but we get input from everybody across the board. So really, our goal is to get people speaking the same language in terms of data, or at least being able to communicate and map from one to the other. And this has been a whistle-stop tour, but I'll share the slides and hopefully you can look through. If there's anything of interest, I'm more than happy to follow up with anyone on this group and give you a bit more information, because communication is key. And things like ontologies, standardized semantics, and particularly structured data really facilitate that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Christian.